Welcome to the Marillion End. My name's Mark Machado. I'm joined by my cousin across the pond, the Professor of Cricketology, Dominic Machado. I'm not sure why I'm pointing. I'm actually just pointing to the door, but there we go. And we've also got Sri Lanka's number one journalist, Estelle Vasudevan, joining us today. She is available not just to talk about cricket. She will talk about all your favourite sports, your news, your current affairs, and your showbiz stuff because she is Sri Lanka's number one journalist. We are talking today about Sri Lanka's top 5 ever batters. This is, of course, because that's the kind of WhatsApp chats that we have in our WhatsApp group pretty much all the time. Who's our top 5 batters? Who's our top 5 bowlers? Who is Sri Lanka's 8th best ever seamer? Those are the conversations that are ongoing. Some might be listening to this and saying we are missing out on Nick because obviously he is a top historian of Sri Lankan cricket and he could kind of bring in the cricket that we might have missed. I know I look as old as trees, but that's not quite true. There was cricket that I was played by Sri Lankans before I was born, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and into my memory starts in the mid-90s. You can probably figure out which point it starts if you're a Sri Lanka fan. We are doing this list today, our top 5, based off players that we've all seen, I believe, or not seen necessarily, but lived through. And also for the purposes of this, we're talking just about the men, because we thought, let's leave Charmry out of it for the moment. Basically, is that a fair thing to say? Everyone, Dom and Estelle, kind of nodding along a little bit. Of course, if you're watching or listening, we'd love your take on this. Leave us in the comment section who your top 5 Sri Lankan batters are of all time. I'd love to know where you agree and where you disagree on us with us. For me, before we start, and I'm going to ask Estelle who her number 5 choice is in a minute. So we'll do obviously from 5 down to 1, like it's top of the pops in the good old days. But for me, before we start this, what I will say is, I think the number 1 choice is obvious. Then there's a big discussion to be had about where you put 2 certain players. The number 4 picks themselves, and the number 5th one is, I don't say a free hit, but I think it's going to tell us a lot about whoever's pick we're having, how they perceive cricket and how they perceive the question and the task that's at hand. So with that, I've talked for about 2.5 minutes now. Estelle, would you like to give us your number 5 pick?
You started at you've given me a tough choice because I don't know if I know who I want to pick at number 5 because I've got 2 names. So I'll just go with it as a tie. I'll go with TM Dilshan and Angelo Matthews as the number 5 pick. I think each one of them has a case for claiming that spot. Angelo, I understand there's probably going to be some what can I say, opposition to that pick because he hasn't really necessarily been one of the fan favorites over the last few years, right? And there's been a lot of issues about whether people like him. Forget about his batting performances. But I think both of them have solid cases. TM Dilshan for me, I feel like might be an underdog in this, in that his numbers aren't special, but at the same time, he's one of those players who had like 2 different stages of his career, right? Like the first half and the second half. And in the second half, he was as prolific as you can imagine. Particularly in the limited overs scene, he was such an impactful player for Sri Lanka, I would say, like coming up the order, the type of runs he made. He was not quite Sanat Jayasuriya, but he could provide some of the firepower that Sri Lanka lost when Jayasuriya retired. And, obviously really innovative. Some of the shots that he played, I think the only guy here who has a shot named after him. So he definitely has a solid case. I just read his numbers in Test cricket. So he's debuted in 99 and played until 2013. 87 tests, 5,492 runs at an average of 40, 1600s. And I think as an opener, his record is really good. I remember we were discussing whether he should be in consideration as one of the best openers Sri Lanka has seen in Test cricket as well. But he didn't have enough runs to really make that case. In ODIs, he's the fourth highest run getter for Sri Lanka, 99 to 2016, 330 games and over 10,000 runs at an average of 39 and strike rate of 86. I think affected by the fact that he had that period of time where he was in the lower middle order and often wouldn't get opportunities or had to go right from the word go. In T20 cricket, 80 games, 1,889 runs, 100 for Sri Lanka as well. So, he's been solid. Angelo, similarly, he's made 8,000 runs in tests. He's the third highest run getter for Sri Lanka. A little lower down in the ODI scene, but still nearly 6,000 runs. And in T20 cricket as well, he has nearly 1,500. So yeah, I know it's a long answer, but it's a tie for me. Dilshan and Mathews.
So the other issue is as well, Angelo's obviously got a lot more time left in his career, so those numbers.
I mean, have you guys seen Dhoni at the IPL?
Well,
There's years to come.
He's got 5 more years easily.
And Angelo offers a lot more than Dhoni does. I mean, like Dhoni's doing a couple of balls at the end of an innings at this stage in his career, right? So we are far, far away from Angelo's Dhoni era. Dom, who's your number 5 pick?
Yeah, so this is a tricky one. I want to say I agree with Estelle about Dilshan. He's my number 5 pick. I think his white ball exploits are severely underrated. I think in sort of the Sri Lankan flourishing from 2009 to 2014, he was arguably the second most important player in that side. He got big hundreds at the top. He scored 22 one-day hundreds, which is an exceptional number. And he brought that attacking impulse, right? I think that was a big thing, is he would go after the bowling. You could count on that cut shot, that pull shot, to bring runs in the early overs. And thinking about the fact that he is filling Sanath Jayasurya's shoes, right? That's who he comes in and steps in for. And there is no conceivable drop off, or there's no considerable drop off at all. Top run scorer in the 2011 World Cup. A very good test cricketer as well, right? Averaging 41 with 1600s, including, I think probably his greatest innings in test cricket was that 193 he scored in England as captain, right? That's one of those things that no one can take away from you. In terms of, I rank Dilshan higher than Angelo. I think the tough part about Angelo is his year or his sort of 2 years from 2013 to 2014 are pretty much as good as any Sri Lankan cricketer has ever batted. Runs when you need him most, at home, abroad, ridiculous averages, while captaining the side. I think he absolutely should get praise for that. But I think since 2015, he's been more of a guy who accumulates stats rather than a difference maker. And that, for me, is the difference between Dilshan and Angelo. And another guy I considered for 5, but ultimately passed on, was Marvin. I think he's severely underrated. He has 8,000 runs in ODI cricket as well, and about 5,000 in Test cricket. Actually, his numbers don't look that dissimilar to Angelo's. And I think in terms of, and this is a bit more of a aesthetic than statistical judgment, I think he was probably our most technically correct batter in terms of playing pace, spin all over the world. He's someone you could count on. He doesn't quite get up to the level of Dilshan, but he's someone that I thought was worth shouting out with that 5th pick. So for me, it's Dilshan as well.
So it's interesting, right? Because I've picked Dilshan as my number 5. But what's really interesting is a few weeks back when we did we asked the AIs to pick Sri Lanka's all-time greatest Test 11. He wasn't in any of them. I don't think he was a player that got mentioned a lot. And that's kind of, I think, part of the reason why I wanted to pick him, because so many times he ended up having to fill in a role which he wasn't. I mean, he's pretty much the only Sri Lanka player I can think of who's batted in basically every position from 1 to 8. And he didn't open the bowling, but he's bowled a lot. He bowled a lot for Sri Lanka, and he's kept wicket. When he was in the side, players talked about how athletic he was. He was known for his fielding prowess. I mean, he plays in all the various uncles leagues now, and he's still, he's still as athletic as he's always been. Gosh, when he was, when we had prime Dilshan, and he would take, he'd raise his bat, take his helmet off, and he'd stand there with his do-rag, and he just looked like a warrior, didn't he? With his facial hair and stuff like that. It was absolutely a brilliant thing to live through. He was, for me, he was like the most buccaneering of the, that just before Angelo arrived, or even when Angelo was there in 13, 14, when you're like, you've got two of the most stable batters that Sri Lanka will ever have right in the middle of this, of our batting lineup. Then you've got Dilshan kind of buccaneering at the top, like the kind of Hulk type batter of the Avengers, and then you've got like Angelo, like Spider-Man, who could do a bit of everything, but his power, no one had fully understood the extent of his powers yet, or the limits of his ability. And then Sangha and Mahela were like Captain America and Iron Man there, right in the middle, and that fall for getting us to that world, to finals and all sorts of things back then, was quite an irresistible lineup. Just kind of my word on Angelo, I still think he's pretty close to this top 5, isn't he? He's there's a lot I've learnt about SEO when it comes to Sri Lankan cricket and what people are looking in search engines over the last couple of years. Angelo Matthews is right up there. I think there's a couple of players who could potentially be in this conversation. Maybe we'll talk about that at the end, but we talked about the Dill Scoop. We can't be that too far away from the Pattern Kiss or something like that. A little bit of innovation coming from the current bunch. They could be in and around this. Who knows? Should we move on to our number 4 pick, Estelle? Who is your number 4?
Yeah, so we're doing a collective list. So 5 would be Dilshan, I guess.
Yeah, 5 will be Dilshan. Yeah.
Okay, so number 4, I am going with Sanath Jayasuriya. I think you guys might have him higher, I don't know. But yeah, Sanath Jayasuriya as a test batter, I think is quite underrated. He has nearly 7,000 runs to his name, and one of those batters who kind of was a bit ahead of his time, right? In the likes of Sehwag and Gale, who could blast a team out, but also play really long innings while doing that, right? You wouldn't see 30s, 40s from him, right? You'd see big knocks and big hundreds for him. I mean, the 340s one, how many double hundreds does he have? I wonder. So he was one of those players who was in many ways an innovator, even if he doesn't have a shot named after him. In the ODI game is where he is most recognized for that, right? Because, the stories with the 96 World Cup, and, just how he went about things at that point where basically it was all out attack, and he had the skills to, execute that kind of plan. I think that is very important to consider, because I feel like, as always, there's continuously talk about playing fearless cricket, right? Particularly when you talk about the Sri Lankan team, I remember when Mickey Arthur took over, that was the conversation. When Kusal Pereira was captain, that was the conversation. But there is a difference between, and I think we're seeing it with England as well, the English test team at least, is that, making the decision to play fearless cricket is one thing, but having the skill to actually execute that kind of thing is different. And I think Sanath Jayasuriya most certainly had it, because if there's another guy who was doing it, Ramesh Kalwitarna, who could not sustain that right? And Sanath was able to do it year in, year out. I think also the fact that he dragged on his career might count against him and his numbers, but nearly 7,000 in Test cricket and 13,000, is it? In 13,000 in ODI cricket. It's hard to look past him as one of the top five. Another really impactful player, and I guess in some ways Dilshan is like a a cheaper version of a Sanat Jayasuriya, if you will. Like, no offense to him, but like he's that kind of player. So, and of course, Sanat inspired generations of players as well, right? Was a core part of Sri Lanka winning a World Cup and many other titles. So,
Yeah. I agree. I have Sanath at 4 as well. And for many of the same reasons as Estelle, I think he revolutionized both one day and test batting. We said he doesn't have a shot named after him, but I think of that cut over the
yeah.
cover fielder as no one will ever play that like he did. How hard that ball came out over, and hitting that shot for 6 was just something absolutely out of this world, and watching him do it. I think, Estelle, you're totally right. I mean, Dilshan and Sanat's career are very much parallel to one another in that you have a do-it-all player who kind of spends a lot of their career down the order and then comes up the order, and that's where they kind of make their name. A couple of things I want to highlight about Sanath, right? Like, I think the kids these days might look at his ODI stats and think an average of 32 at a strike rate at 91. That's like a middling average player. But he scored 28 hundreds. I think that is an outstanding number. That's the most for any Sri Lankan cricketer. He won, I believe, 48 Man of the Match awards, which is second all time only to Sachin. And in terms of what he was as a player, he was a match winner. Fastest 50, fastest 100 when he set the records for both of those. I think for the fastest 50 as well, 150 as well. Highest ODI score after when he hit that 189. He just dominated white ball batting, and I think you hear a player like Wasim Akram talk about him, the fear that he instilled in the opposition, because they knew that if he got in the zone, it was match over.
Yeah.
And there's no higher praise for me in any sport than being a match winner, a guy who wins games for his side on his own, and that's what Sanath was. I think we think of Sanath the larger than life being now, right? Given his position in Sri Lankan cricket, I think that's another thing that's worth mentioning. And I think I was thinking as I was coming up with my list, to make the top 5, you got to be a one name guy. You can't be oh, blah blah blah. Can't be 2 names. You have to be known
Pramodya
by one.
Wickramasinghe.
Exactly. You can't do right. You can't have him. You can't have right. You can't be a two name guy. You just got to be. Everyone has to know you by one name, and Sanath is the name that we know him by.
Obviously I've got the same as you guys. I mean, for me, I've said this on this show, and I've said this everywhere I've ever had to talk about him, and I love talking about him. Sanath is the beating soul of Sri Lankan cricket, and also I think actually Sri Lankan culture in a way. Right, he's the when I talk about him to audiences that aren't Sri Lanka fans, or know much about Sri Lankan cricket, I always talk about he doesn't come from a big Colombo school, he doesn't come from a big Kandy school, he comes from an unfashionable what Sri Lankans call outside of Colombo, outstation. He comes from a humble background, but he climbs the top of the game. I mean, there's no end of people, and I'm going to throw my name into this list of who will tell you that if there's no Sanath Jayasuriya, if there's no Sri Lanka playing the style of cricket they play in 1996, then there is no IPL. There isn't all these big changes written out to people. The circus doesn't roll into town if Sana doesn't exist and isn't able to play the way he's able to play. I think the thing that's lost about him slightly, because he is such a character, such a larger than life figure, he's become the nation's uncle, as it were. Is that he was an innovator, and also he was incredibly professional as well. The stories about when he was batting for what seemed like about 1,000 days to get his 340, and he was I think he batted literally for 2 days, didn't he? But straight afterwards, when they got back to the hotel, he was straight in the pool swimming and being professional and doing the things that I think are slightly lost in the mythos around him as well. And so that's a lot of people are quite when the conversation was right. He's the head coach. He's in charge of the operation now. A lot. I felt that was slightly lost. I think people didn't realise that actually he maintained standards as a player, which meant that he did probably play for slightly too long. And I was at that last game at the Oval, and it's one of the saddest things I'd ever seen. Right. But it was for me, it was like being at WrestleMania when the Undertaker lost his streak. But I think if I remember correctly, I think he was in. He came into bat, and I think he lasted 4 balls. I think the first one, nothing happened. I think the second one he hit for 4 or 6. The third one he hit for 4 and 6, and then he got bowled out, or he got caught out, or miss hit on the 4th, and that was kind of the end of the great man's tenure. But in a way, and now at the time when I think about it, we were all absolutely gutted. But in a way, when I talk it through there, I'm like, maybe that was the best way for him to go, right? Because that did he brought the noise, he brought the action, and he's slightly flawed, but I still think he is the soul, the spirit of what when Sri Lanka is good, it is always good in his image in some way.
And that's why he's so loved, right? I think that is the reason that people even now, unfortunately, find it difficult to criticize him, is because there is this aura that you have about him. Sanat Jayasuriya is the one who, changed things for Sri Lanka, like visually, right? Behind the scenes, the tacticians were different and all of that, right?
Yeah.
But he was the guy who made cricket enjoyable for entire generation to watch. And you're seeing, like, I mean, we spoke about Chamari and not including her in this. People like that are born because Sanat went first, right? Sanat was the first of that kind. For me, like, one of the biggest kind of attestations to his skill is that he was like 40 when he hit that IPL 100, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, you had some of the best young players in the world in the bowling attack, and even at that age he was able to take them apart. So yeah, I think he's deserved number 4. And again, to reiterate, like, he was an underrated test player, I feel.
Yeah.
I think also there's loads of lazy cricket tropes, but one of them is that South Asian players are lazy and don't aren't fit enough to play cricket. I mean, maybe his eye had gone, and maybe he wasn't, he wasn't anywhere near his peak by the time he retired. He played too long, but to be able to play like in an IPL, and I know the IPL wasn't what it was back then, at the age of 40, and get a century is real testament to his actual professionalism. We talked about Angelo, and obviously when we talk about Angelo now, it's Angelo in 2025 is very different to Angelo in 2014, right? And a lot of that is not his fault, because a lot of that is injuries. But you go on Angelo's Instagram, and I just can't believe that Angelo is only going to the gym to get 3 or 4 Instagram videos every time to post up and get it. Like, these guys are actual professionals. They are fit. They are people who are looking after themselves. And I think
how much did he pay you, Mark?
Sends me lunch packets
You
every
know,
day, doesn't he?
lump
That's your
rice,
supplier for the
lump
lump
rice.
rice.
Yeah. Uh, but like I think it's an easy thing that often happens when you discuss the South Asian cricketers. It's they're unfit, they can't play. That look at our guys, they're unfit, and it's like, well, they go out and do it. Like they're actually going out. You stood in the heat anywhere, and tried to play cricket. You can't be like that unfit. I'm not saying that that they're the fittest players of all time or anything like that, but to be 14 to get a century is quite tough.
Yeah, yeah. And even if you look at what someone like Travis Head is doing, he's basically just doing the updated version of Sanath, right? Like his game is actually quite similar, right? He takes advantage of the power play in much the same way. Any width, he's absolutely brutal on. And I think he's the mold of player we will always continue to see because it's special and it's game changing and it moves the game along.
It makes the game
Um,
fun, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah, like I mean, there's a big argument like that Sana Jayasuriya saved cricket. Like if you if you say that the IPL has saved cricket, T20 cricket saved cricket, that came directly from the style of cricket that he was at
He
the
is
forefront of.
T20 cricket, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So maybe
Imagine
Sana.
the amount of money he would have been making if like the
oh my
IPL
God.
existed in 90, say 98, 99 onwards.
Yeah.
He would have
In
been
that
like,
right,
I mean, he
Sunil
made a lot of
Narayan.
money through
Yeah,
cricket. He made a lot of money, but like it could have been even more.
spin bowler who can bowl at all phases
Oh
and smash
man.
around at
Yeah.
top, right?
Great
Yeah.
fielder.
Yeah, Venkatesh Iyer got what 26 crore.
Yeah, but you get more if you're domestic, isn't it? So
Yeah,
You
yeah,
do, yeah.
yeah. Should we move on to our number 3 pick? Estelle, do you want to go first?
Okay, number 3. I'm going Mahela as my number 3 pick. He's got the numbers, right? Like his second highest run scorer in Test cricket, third highest in ODI cricket, number 5 in T20 cricket with the limited kind of opportunities he got. I still think that, like, given the amount of the kind of player he was, that he kind of underachieved in his career, and he did, like, he had an entire career, and it's not like he had a bad one, right? He had a really good one. He's number 3 on this list for me, so he had a really good one. But you always get that sense that maybe he could have done more. There were those periods where he was completely out of form. He had that, early in his career where he was very kind of almost reckless in the way he played shots, because he had every shot in the book, right? But I think as he grew older, the type of innings he played, I think a lot of people will talk about the final against India, that 100 in the ODI World Cup. But to me, another great one he played was against New Zealand in the 2007 semi-final, where, I think he took like he scored like 40 runs in the last 6 overs to get his 100, which is not common at that point, right? Not in 2007. In 2025, it might be a little more frequent that we see that. He's got the volume of runs, I think, so it's very difficult to push him down the order. And he's played important knocks, right? He's got hundreds around the world in both ODI and Test cricket. I think he was a decent T20 cricketer as well. He adapted his game really well to the format and what it was like at the point that he was playing. And he was alongside Sangha and Dilshan, and the bowling attack of Malinga and Ajanta Mendes, all of them, part of that really golden era for Sri Lanka, right? And one of the reasons that Sri Lanka was doing well is because he was making runs in all formats of the game. So I think there could be an argument of him being number 2 based on the amount of runs he made, but I think 3 is kind of the sweet spot for Mahela.
Dom, who do you got at 3?
yeah. I have it flipped, Estelle. So I have Aravinda de Silva
Mm-hmm.
at 3, and I think and I think the reason it's tricky because I actually see Aravinda and Mahela as very similar players in terms of um, batting talent. They're actually, to my mind, one and two that the island has ever produced. Right? There were no sweeter batters to watch when they were in flow. They had all the shots. They could score all around the ground, and those two were the ones that made cricket look easy when they were batting. Right? It's hard to face 40 kilometer per hour ball and look like you have endless time, but those two could do it. Um, for me, it's I think Aravinda is definitely the better white ball player. I would say that Mahela was the better red ball player. Uh, I also think you could say, given the way that people speak about Aravinda's talent, right, that he underachieved as well, and
Yeah.
that's a ridiculous thing to say, right? Um, World Cup champion, uh, scored 30 plus hundreds in his Sri Lanka career. Had arguably the greatest performance ever on a World Cup final stage. Um, at this point, we're splitting hairs. We're not saying that one player was better than the other, or that this player is not a good player. Obviously, Aravinda de Silva is a legend. But I wonder, and this is something we can always consider, whether time often acts as an enhancer of legacy, right? So when you can clip up Aravinda playing the pull shot, and you're like, wow, that's an amazing shot, because it really is an amazing shot. How is it different than, say, a more modern player like Mahela, where we had eyes on more, where I certainly had eyes on more of his games, more of his failures, more of the times he got out. Whereas the Aravinda knocks that I watch and rewatch are the ones that where he came through. Right. So I
And their
wonder if there's
highlights, right?
the highlights, right?
Most of them.
The almost recency anti-bias, if that makes sense. Whereas um, we talk about that semifinal and final in '96, and it doesn't matter what happened in other games, right? You can almost excuse it because he's a World Cup winner. But to get back to Aravinda, I just want to talk about why he was so good. I mean, he made batting look easy. He was oozing talent, and we talked about people like Sanath and Dilshan maturing in the second half of their careers and becoming great players. In Aravinda, there was always a great player. Maybe not the consistency that he
Yeah.
had later in his career, but I think everyone knew. I think going in '89 to Australia and scoring a double hundred in New Zealand, everyone knew how much talent, how much skill this guy had. Also, to talk about, he was 5'3", and he was facing the most fearsome fast bowlers in the world and hooking and pulling them with relentless aggression. And I think that was what was amazing about him. He never came to just hang around. He came to, and this is a bit like Sanath, to dominate the bowlers. He existed to dominate them. And Estelle, I think you've touched on this. Um, Post '96, if he's able to keep that post '96 run for maybe a touch longer, he gets number two in my book. But he was so good in both one day and Test cricket. He was just rolling out hundreds. They're almost going as fast as the cars that he likes to drive. And I think at his peak, I think peak Aravinda is probably the best
The
batter that
best.
Sri
Yeah.
Lanka produced, right? Like that peak from, say, '97 to '99. That we've never really seen anything like that, and we'll be hard pressed to see anything like that. But for me, kind of the stories we tell about Aravinda, going out late night and drinking, and then scoring, a 267 in New Zealand. I think we reflect on them differently with distance than we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Like, if we heard that story about him today, he would get flogged in the media. So I just, my impression is that, or my thought is that he is undoubtedly probably the most talented batter Sri Lanka's ever produced. His peak was the highest, but at the same time, we could have expected it just a little bit more. But you know, he brought Sri Lanka to heights that have been unreached since. We have not won an ODI World Cup since Aravinda's magnificent 100. Mark, where do you stand on this
So
debate?
I've
Tiebreaker.
gone for a third. No, I've gone for the third choice. I've got Kumar as my number 3.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know,
Oh
maybe
my
it's because I'm
god.
slightly older than you guys, but I remember Kumar when he first broke into the side, and his obviously we know how good he was, right? We know how good he became. We know where his ceiling was, but he just wasn't anywhere near Mahela or Aravinda when you compare them at that point in their career. And for me, the big thing is that Kumar Sankara just does not become as good a player as he becomes if it wasn't for two people, Aravinda Silva and Mahela, right? That doesn't mean so. I took this to the way I interpret this is almost like, well, I can't put Kumar first because he needs two things. He needs somebody who's gone and done it before. He needs to see it. So he needs to see what Aravinda's done. And, earlier in the career, I think even doing. But he also needs somebody else in the changing room. He needs a Mahela to I could be clumsy and say drag him along, but it's not that. It's more mentorship. It's more what Mahela gets out of him and the standard Mahela sets, and also the kind of friendship that he has. I definitely look. I'm not. Obviously I've kind of passed these people in press boxes and stuff like that, but I admire all of these people, and I'm like talking at the top of the my kind
Yeah.
of ultra 0.01% of people I'd love to spend time with. But I think if you get into the weeds of it, if you get to the psychology of it, Mahela is so important to Kumar's career that if Mahela doesn't exist, if Aravinda doesn't exist, Kumar just does not become as good a player as he becomes, right? And that because of that kind of weird juxtaposition that Kumar that triumvirate people play for me is the third choice. There is no Mark Anthony without Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, right? So even though Anthony goes on to achieve great things, you need the other two characters in the game, as it were. And because of that, I think almost you could add some of Kumar's runs at the back end of his career into Mahela. You could add some of the runs at the beginning of his career into Aravinda and be like, yeah, so Kumar's a metamorphosis of this kind of raw talent that becomes like the ultimate batting machine by the end of it. But that process just isn't in place unless those two other people aren't there. And that's why I absolutely adored watching Kumar Sankara bat. I absolutely think he was an absolutely incredible batter. And I mean, if I had to pick one person to bat for my life right now, of the 5 people that are on my list, then I'm definitely picking Kumar because he's coming into it with the best mindset and with the strongest technique. But in terms of their influence in Sri Lankan cricket, I think the other two in this conversation for me are much more important than Kumar Sankara. So that's why I'm putting him in third place.
So this is why we need our fans to come in,
Yeah.
and share their points of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, because now we obviously have a split decision.
Yeah, we have a 3-way tie.
So
The thing
the question
though, what Mark said though is that we're not talking about necessarily influence, are we?
Yeah.
Because I think because that becomes an entirely different conversation then, because like, I don't know if TM Dilshan makes this 5, right? If that's a consideration. And I know this is like, it's Mark's interpretation of how
Yeah.
things are going. For me, I was looking at, as a batsman, as Dom mentioned about Aravinda, as on his day, if you have to judge them on their best day, Aravinda is number 1 without a shadow of a doubt for me. And probably Mahela is 2, right? But the thing is, Sangakkara did the best day of his life more frequently than the other two, to me. He's that he
Yeah.
was at the top of his game for so long that I don't know if, like, Mahela and Aravinda both had great careers, but they were never able to maintain that level of excellence across formats across huge time period.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think with Sangha is there are two Sri Lankan batters that have held this title where people will watch them and say that is the best batter in the world, period, full stop. And for me, that's Sangha and Sathasivam, right? And we only have Sathasivam as recorded by Worrell and Sobers, but I would take their opinion rather strongly. But I think what Estelle was saying is that the A game, I guess, that Mahela and Aravinda and to some extent Sanath brought was better than Sanga's A game. But Sangha brought that A game much more consistently and with much more regularity. And some of the stats are just frankly ridiculous. Like and we'll talk about it when we get to the one, but for me, he's by far, it's kind of funny because now, speaking of recency bias, my mom will send me clips of Sangakkara batting, and it's all these clips of on Facebook of his cover drives and people talking
Yeah.
about how beautiful of a batter he is. But in my eye, and I tell this to my mom, like he's not the most beautiful batter, Sri Lankan batter to watch by a long shot. He's technically correct. He's excellent. But he wasn't the most talented, right? We know Mahela was picked out at the age of 19, right? He comes into a Sri Lankan squad that is real right off a World Cup. He makes it into a squad that's coming off of a World Cup victory. Sangha doesn't make it until 2000, but what he did with the opportunities he got and what he did once he figured out how to play the game at a high level at the international level was unmatched.
How much of that, though, this is why I think I've got to put him at 3. How much of that is down to the conditions around him that Mahela was able to create? Because we know Mahela.
But how do we make that judgment that it was Mahela who created that? Because I felt like it's a two-way thing, right? Each of them made each other better, in my opinion. So,
but if you talk to the people in the team, and from what we know subsequently from what's been written and said about it, Mahela was the leader of the side, right? He was the guy who was coming up with the strategy and coming up with figuring out people's strengths and weaknesses, and when you talk to people who played cricket with Mahela, they're almost evangelical about him and about what he brings into a change room and the way he communicates and talks to players. And the way he figures out what drives you, what doesn't drive you. We've kind of seen that play out in his subsequent post-playing career, where he's basically got the biggest job in cricket, right? The two biggest jobs in cricket are the coach of the Indian cricket team, or to be the head of cricket at the Mumbai Indians organisation. Which
what about chairman of BC?
or, like from a playing perspective, at least, right? I'm sure all those things are in his future, right? If he wants them, and you. So it's not just Sri Lankan players who have this opinion, and it's not just Sri Lankan administrators who have this opinion. It's people out with it. So I just think. And I mean, Mahela's stats are unbelievable as well. I mean, Mahela is the prince that was promised, and then arrives and as a 19-year-old and sticks all the way through and is at the forefront of this dynasty and is kind of in my mind, Mahela is Jordan and Sangha is Rodman, and the whole point is that Mahela gets into a place where he knows that he has to be the best at what he's doing. Except Rodman, it's about rebounds. I think I don't really understand basketball, and Sangha is just about batting in the middle order.
You're right.
So one thing I do agree with you, Mark, that and I think this is true of both Aravinda, and we talked about this when we were talking about Aravinda and 96, is that Aravinda and Sangha, you just let them bat. You tell them not to worry about anything else. Just get your runs. It doesn't matter how they come. Just do it. So I think there is a certain amount of freedom you get from saying, it's a bit like Sachin in India, right? Sachin didn't captain because they said, Sachin, just go bat and score us runs. And Sangha was allowed to develop as a run scorer, to go from just to take his white ball career from sort of um, there were accusations that his batting style hurt the team early in his career, right? Where he was batting, his strike rate was in the high 60s and low 70s, and that he was just out there to score runs. And they stuck with him and let him do that. And then he became a white ball monster once he figured out how to do that. Same thing with wicket keeping, right? It would have been great to have Sangha as a wicket keeper, but they pulled the wicket keeping duties out from him, and he goes and he averages a ridiculous 66. And I think this is the thing about Mahela, and we'll talk about what makes him number two for me, is that when the pressure was on, when they needed something from him, he would always do it, right? As Estelle said, in that semifinals against New Zealand, when no one else could bat, he made it look so easy. In the final against India, when everybody was just when no one could score off Zaire Khan, when Harbhajan was causing all sorts of problems, he made it look easy. And I think he was that man for when you needed a captain's knock. He averaged 59, 60 when he was captain. He scored 1,400s in his 38 matches as captain. In the biggest moment, he was always a big, big, big game player. And I think he's almost equivalent in my mind to Aravinda on that level. Like when we needed him, he came through. And I think of to again dynamically kind of oppose Sangha and Mahela. We all know about Sangha's 4 consecutive World Cup hundreds, right? And that was a brilliant achievement. But Sri Lanka won all those games in a walkover. Mahela's 100 in that comes when they're almost about to lose to Afghanistan, right? And they're like 50 for 4. He comes in and scores 100 when they need it the most. So for me, Mahela has that combination of that clutch gene plus the mountain of runs that he scored, as Estelle said, all across the world. I think in terms of Test cricket, the only place he never scored 100 was South Africa. And one thing that I sort of applaud Mahela for is against the best teams. If you look at his average, it's absolutely ridiculous. Even if he didn't perform necessarily brilliantly away in those places, when they came and visited Sri Lanka, he always put up big scores. So against England, he averages 58 with 8 hundreds. Against India, he averages 67 with 6 test hundreds. Against South Africa, he averages 57 with 6 test hundreds, right? Including that 374. So for me, that's kind of why I put Mahela above Aravinda, is that he had the clutch gene and he had the bigger numbers. I still don't think he comes up to Sangha's level, because Sangha we're talking about the greatest batter, right? We'll talk about the numbers. He was just amazing.
So hold on, I've lost track of where we are right now. So
we can go to second pick, right?
Yeah. So that was your reasoning.
Mahela is 2. Yeah,
Mahela is 2. Estelle, do you want to give us your second pick and your?
So I will go with Aravinda as my number 2 pick. I just think the reason I'm picking him above Mahela, and I agree to a degree on what Dom was talking about, right? Mahela's clutch gene and all of that. And what Mark mentioned, the strategic side of things, right? But I think for me, I'm picking purely on batting performance, because I feel like there are too many variables to guess what would have happened, right? Like, what if this influence wasn't there? We don't know. We don't know if Sangha would have done well or wouldn't have done well, but we do know he did really well. Like that, that's not something that you can debate. He's, done really well. So back to Aravinda, I feel like that'll be the big argument. Will be Aravinda or Sangha. I wasn't really thinking it would be Mahela, but obviously you guys have kind of switched it around. But for me, I'm picking Aravinda above Mahela because I think they are quite similar in that they are earmarked as these incredibly talented young players and brought into the team quite young. But Aravinda was doing all that when Sri Lanka was shit, right? And he had no one around him. And he was going to Australia and he was going to New Zealand in his like the first 5 years of his career and making hundreds and like destroying bowling attacks.
Yeah.
So I feel like he does not have the numbers that Mahela has, right? But also there were years where Sri Lanka didn't play international cricket when he was an international cricketer. So I feel like that the fact of like how cricket was played at that point, it wasn't professional as it was during the Sangai Mahela era. The circumstances in which he did make runs, and I think it's again very similar in that without Arjuna, would there have been an Aravinda, right? But just all that culminates into this great player. I do agree with Dom in that with time, there's almost like I didn't watch him in 89, right? I barely remember 96, but there's all these stories and, he all of that brought in. But I think if you still look at his numbers, and unfortunately I couldn't get like the true stuff on time from Varun before this part, but like I think if you still look at his numbers, he's ahead of Mahela in both formats, test and one day cricket. And just on like why I haven't picked him at one is that I'll get into more on Sanga at number one, obviously, but like I just think it's hard to look past the numbers for that one. For the title, it's hard to look past the numbers.
So for me, my number 2 pick's going to be Mahela. And it's largely for the reasons that kind of Dom's laid out. I also think there's a lot written and spoken about what happens to Sri Lankan cricket post 2015. Was it 2015 or 2016? We were good for just till the World Cup, right? In 2015, and then after that, it just
I think we were on the way down during the World Cup, weren't we?
Yeah. But it quite fell away quite dramatically, and I just think that he was such a brain in the changing room, in and around the whole operation of it, and he got so much out of so many players. Dom, when me and you were in Lords the other day, a couple of months ago, and there were so many Sri Lankan names on the boards during series that he was there for, and I was just like, we played with so much confidence. People, there is still people in and around our cricket setups, like as in players, not just Angelo, but others who come to the end of their careers now, who I'm thinking of Chandimal and people like that who were absolute world beaters, or looked like they were going to pick the torch up and carry on and take us to yet another reign of being an incredible cricket team while he was in the side. And when he stepped away, it all quickly fell apart. Maybe it was just what he brought to the pitch, but it's the role you're willing to play when you get in cricket. It's when you get those runs. But you can use other sports analogies about when the chips are down. Can you do it? And he did so much more. Did he? I mean, he's batted at quite over the order as well, didn't he? In all the formats. I mean,
particularly white ball, right? I think, that was one thing that was interesting when you were just talking about that, Mark. I think when we saw this in his brief T20 career, he would have been a fantastic opener.
Yeah.
He was kind of made for that, but he was kind of never really allowed to take that position. For a number of reasons, and part of me wonders, would we think of him differently
when he
was allowed to play that?
When you go back and look at that time in T20 cricket, and I'm talking basically from its conception to about 2015, 2016, the kind of 3 dominant sides are Australia, the West Indies, and Sri Lanka, and all tactical innovation in what is at that point effectively a new sport is basically coming from those three sides, right? And Sri Lanka did a lot tactically in T20 cricket early on. I mean, we've really don't do much at this moment in time. We kind of turn up to every World Cup with this tactics that won the last World Cup, hoping that maybe we might be the guys who do it this time. But at that time, we know now subsequently that almost all of that was coming from Mahela, right? So
Yeah, I don't think.
I do think though he sacrificed some numbers. He sacrificed some of his own numbers for the sake of the team, and I like, for me, that from a sports perspective, that's like the ultimate thing you can do, isn't it? He could have said,
Yeah,
this is my place, this is what I'm doing, that's where I'm batting, that's it. But he said, no, I'm not about the stats. I don't care if in 10 years' time, two blokes and a girl are doing a top 5 and they don't rate me. I want to win this cricket game. That's what he
but
said.
we do rate him at like.
Yeah, no, I know. Like, they don't rate him as highly as some of his peers.
I just think, Mark, that you've considered the entire cricketer and not the batting, just the batting.
I as a person, I find it impossible to separate them.
Because like tactically, there is no, I don't think anybody is going to argue that he's probably one of Sri Lanka's best tacticians, right? No one's going to argue that, because, you know, we've seen the evidence to suggest that he was really awesome during that period of time. But yeah, again, like, I don't know if the batting stacks up to that. And like, you can say the sacrifices and stuff, but like, what matters is what's happened, right?
The what if
and
doesn't get you to number one. Yeah. I will say, I think one thing that's underrated about Mahela is, if we can say he underachieved a bit, particularly as a white ball player, I do think that he was a very, very good T20 player when for the era he played in. He was striking at 135. In terms of using the whole field, right? Everyone calls AB de Villiers Mr. 360, but Mahela did it with touch, right? He knew how to score behind square. He knew how to score to third man. He had every shot in the book, and I think he used that, and he used it in a way. He brought beautiful batsmanship to T20 cricket. It wasn't just about bashing the ball. It was about thinking, okay, what can I force the bowler to do that'll make me that'll allow me to score runs? And I think that was I would have loved to see how he evolved when striking at 130 isn't good enough and you needed to strike at 150, 160. It would have been really interesting to see how he would have met that challenge.
It
was like he went back to, he kind of had, he could play like he wanted to when he was young, right? But but by this time he had the experience to understand like what shots to play at which point. But he brought that ability that he had maybe kind of like kept aside for a bit during that middle period. He was able to bring that out, I feel, like at the end of his career. And like people, like, I'm not saying that Mahela is a bad batter, okay? I'm saying I don't think he's the best or in the top 2, but you guys will probably decide, because we've got another have we? No. 2 of us decided Aravinda?
Wait, let's see. I have
you and Mahela.
Yeah. I have. And so wait, I had Mahela at 2. You had Mahela at 2.
Yeah.
No,
so
I had Mahela at 2.
Oh, Estelle. Okay.
I had Mahela at 2. So my number 1 pick is Aravinda, and I think both of yours is Kumar, right?
Yeah.
Should I put the?
It's funny because you said like there's this guy and there's Daylight and then there's the other 2. I assumed that you were going Sangha.
Oh yeah, I actually thought you were debating between. I thought your ranking was
Aravinda Mahela.
I actually thought it was going to be Sangha and then Sanath and Aravinda and then Mahela 4th. I actually thought it was going to be your ranking, Mark. So you surprised me on all those counts.
So I thought everyone was going to debate about where to put Kumar and Mahela 2 and 3.
I guess we've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also, I mean, you guys have put Kumar at one. I put Aravinda at one because, I mean, famously, when I was a kid in Colombo, people be like, if you see a Ferrari, it's Aravinda de Silva driving it. And I'm thinking, that man deserves a spaceship. Like, give him, like, a Ferrari's the least that man should be driving. He was so far ahead of everyone else that we had for such a long time, scoring runs in silos, going so long, such big gaps between playing international cricket. He comes to Kent in 1995 and he's the talk of the town. He's eating short eats on the pitch and going for nights out before a game. Of course, he's my number one cricketer for number one batter in this list. Gosh, there's a great piece that Estelle was involved in writing about how good he is. And how good he was. I think he set the standard for what we can expect cricketers, international cricketers, to be like in terms of not their off-field behaviour, but their on-field batting. Yeah. And not that it counts.
Yeah, don't drink. You're not going to be able to make a double 100 the next day. Don't do that.
Yeah. That modern shrunken cricketers, it will instantly melt and fall away if you even look at a bottle. But I mean, he was just class. He was just absolutely brilliant. He's of the five players we are talking about, he is by far and away the most aesthetically pleasing on your eye when he's batting in full flow. And sorry, go on. Mahala's a very good looking batter as well, but Aravinda. I mean, the whole reason that I'm a Shrunken fan is because of 1996, right? And when I was just watching TV as a little child, I didn't realize this, but that whole team is built around letting this guy thrive and succeed. And for 4 weeks in March or February, March, whatever it was, it just works, and it's just the most beautiful, perfect thing. And I'll forever be grateful for it. And it's probably it's such an early core memory for me. And I'm not taking away any of the other choices that anyone else did, but I just don't, for me, and from the way I look at cricket and the way how impactful 1996 has been on almost everything I do, seeing this guy who just looks like the most average Sri Lankan man in the world, and I'm not saying that a negative thing. Sri Lankan men are, even an average one is really good looking, coming out and just doing a thing in a world around me where everything else that's rated Sri Lanka seems to be falling apart, and he's so excellent at it. It just blew my mind off and blew my socks off. And I was just like, get this man a spaceship. Sorry, guys. Do you want to put the argument for Kumar as the best batter of all time?
Yeah. So just to kind of go off what Mark was saying, this is a quote from Mahela, right? And I'm not saying just because Mahela says it, then, that's the only kind of reasoning you want. But I think it perfectly captures the feeling of this pod in how we've gone about our picks. So he says, Kumar Sangakkara is the best batsman that Sri Lanka has ever produced. Aravinda de Silva will always be a sentimental favourite for most Sri Lankans, including me. I think that's fair, right? Anyone who picks Aravinda, there's going to be a lot of personal connection related to it. In you kind of talk about the type of cricket you grew up watching, and the impact Aravinda had on your life and on cricket as a whole. But to me, like I mentioned before, I just think you can't look past what Sangakkara achieved. In that, there was all the chat about, Mahela is the more talented one, Sangakkara is the hard worker, all of that. But at the end of the day, the guy just went out there, and day in and day out, he kept doing it. And I feel like he doesn't get the recognition that maybe a Mahela or Aravinda gets in some circles, is because he wasn't that flashy guy, right? Who played he has a good cover drive, but every left-hander who plays a cover drive has a good cover drive, right? But Mahela was amazing to watch. Aravinda was it was a spectacle, right? Sanat Jayasuriya was like a fireworks show. Sangakkara was just the guy who you wouldn't even notice what he's done. But I was just looking through like the all-time rankings and stuff like that. His highest rating in the test charts places him tied at number 7 with Viv Richards, Gary Sobers, Clyde Walcott, right? In ODIs, surprisingly, he's had a higher ranking than Aravinda, or they're equal on 24th, right? So I just think that speaks to the consistency in that he's been performing well regularly enough that it's picked up on rankings. And of course, there are flaws in the rankings, and it's not that that order is exactly like that when you're ranking the top players in the world. But I feel like that reflects how consistently been excellent. And just one more thing, if I can read out to you guys from an article in Cricinfo, right, about him. And this was at the time of his retirement, so possibly there might be one or two batters who have gone past him. Among batsmen with at least 8,000 runs, only Sobers has a better average. In matches which Sangha played as a specialist batsman, his average is 66.78, second only to Donald Bradman's 99.94 among batsmen who have at least 1,000 runs, right? So those are two of the biggest names in cricket, right? His tally of 11 double centuries in tests is only one short of Bradman's 12. His 11,679 runs at number 3 is easily the best, more than 1,100 than Rahul Dravid managed in that position in fewer innings, right? He was I don't know, this might have changed now. He's the fastest in terms of innings to 8,000, 9,000, 11,000, and 12,000 runs. And he's joined fastest to 10,000 runs alongside Sachin Tendulkar and Brian Lara. So I just think if you just, numbers aren't everything in cricket, and we've seen that, right, with stats. But I think you just cannot look past the numbers he was able to put up. I would say there's Sangha at 1 and there's daylight between him and number 2.
Yeah, Estelle, I want to pick up on a stat that you brought up, the when he played as a pure batter, right? So this basically 86 matches, he scored 9,283 runs in those 86 matches. So he's scoring more than 100 runs per match. An innings average of 66.78. And in those 86 matches, he scored 31 hundreds and 41 50s. That is just a ridiculous conversion rate. And I think Sangha, you mentioned his consistency. He is, I think, 5th all time in consecutive innings without a duck, 85 innings without a duck in Test cricket. And Estelle brought up the stat of batting at number 3. Statistically, he's one of the best batters at number 3 in the world. But I just want to make it clear how much better he is than any other Sri Lankan number 3. Sangha has 37 hundreds at number 3 in Test cricket. The next highest is Kusal Mendes with 5. That's the gap in the quality between, number 3 batters. I think in terms of average, it's a similar gap. I think Mahela actually has the second highest average among Sri Lankan batters that have batted at 3, but he didn't do it very much because Sangha was doing it. But he is by far, he held down the most difficult position to bat in all of Test cricket for a decade and a half. And he's the first, I mentioned this, first player in the modern era where worldwide commentators would say he is the best batter in the world. And there was definitely a time when Sangha was considered to be the best batter in world cricket. And I think another thing that I'll bring to bear on this is, yes, he wasn't as talented as Aravinda or Mahela, but the amount that he realized from his potential was just absolutely outstanding. I think when we first saw him play one-day cricket, we never thought he'd be much of anything. He became one of the most lethal one-day batters in the world by the end of his career. In terms of understanding batting, I don't think we've ever had anyone who's understood batting better. I remember watching, this 2015 World Cup where he scores 4 consecutive hundreds. And it just seemed like every ball he had an idea of what was coming before it happened. He knew where the gaps were. He knew exactly what shot to play. He had his game plan perfectly fixed. And I think he's kind of the first Sri Lankan batter that we can't just say, oh, he was great to watch. He was remarkably talented. He had the stats. He has the stats to make it sort of unquestionable that he is one of the greats to ever cross the to beyond the cricket field, and not just, oh yeah, he was a great player, we love to watch him, but his numbers rank with anybody in the game, right? There's no one who you can look at and say, oh yeah, well, Sangha is nothing compared to that guy, right? He's fit to rank with any batsman from any age of the game because of what he did on the field consistently for so long, and that is special from a Sri Lankan perspective, to go from being like, oh, here are the chippy underdogs who put up a dazzling performance, to, hey, here's a guy of world class quality who does it day in and day out, who you can't just say, oh well, he's going to get out for a duck. You had to work to get him out no matter what, and guess what? Most times you couldn't work a way out of it. Absolutely outstanding. The numbers are just, they defy belief in terms of how good he was on a consistent basis, and that's why he's my number one.
Yeah, and also one thing I forgot to mention is that, like, between the three who we've gone with, right, as our top three in different kind of sequences, like Sanga's greatness, I think, like, people outside Sri Lanka judged him by his runs overseas. And I think just looking at his numbers, he doesn't average less than 35 anywhere except the West Indies, where he averages 34, right? And he's averaging 60 plus in Australia, 40 plus in England, 61 in New Zealand, right? So in the tough conditions, India is the only one where he's 36.5 amongst those, like the tough touring nations, right? Whereas I don't think Mahela's or Aravinda's numbers stack up in that way. It's we say that, Mahela made clutch runs, scoring overseas. I think it gets overshadowed by those flashy knocks, right? It's like you make the 100 in the World Cup final. It's great. Of course, it's great. Like Mahela's knock was awesome. Of course, Aravinda's was even better because we won the tournament. But like those kind of knocks don't get weighed the same against like the many hundreds Sangakkara has made in different parts of the world, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, Estelle, because I think one of the knocks on Sangha was he didn't have a good record in England before that 2014 tour, and that Mahela was better in England than he was. But if you look at their career stats, Mahela averages 35 and Sangha averages 41. So Mahela produced those hundreds, right? We can remember the hundreds at Lords. But Sangha, the consistency that made him good was just phenomenal, right? Everywhere, every inning, you could count on him to produce something special.
Guys, we've discussed this for over an hour now. Should we kind of leave it there? If you're watching, if you're listening, if you're on Instagram, A, make sure you're following and subscribing, and B, leave us who you think your top 5 Sri Lankan batters are, who's got it right and who's got it wrong. Slag me off all you want. The only thing I will say is we love all of these people. It's no slander or slander at any of them, and that's the forum that is the Murli, it's all about having these great, incredibly deep conversations about the minutiae of Sri Lankan greats. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. We've been the Murli, and we'll be back very, very soon. Bye.